What is up, guys? It is another day here on the Awesemo YouTube channel, another MLB slate to talk through all of the finer points of. We will get to all of it today, but I am Chris Spags, joined once again by a man who this weekend slandered my good name mere minutes after I left the channel, but he's back with me today, and boy, there's hell to pay, Greg, after we just had a nice conversation for 10 minutes. He's Greg Ehrenberg. How you doing, Greg?
You know what's funny is I do so many shows that I just kind of forget what I say on the shows sometimes. And so I was definitely because I didn't even reference. I was like, I hope Spags is watching while I was ripping into Money Time and overall you're hawking for likes and whatnot. But I had totally forgot about that until you brought it up just now, because we were talking about other stuff right before the show started. And then, and then you brought it up right here. I was like, oh, that's correct. I did say those things.
It's funny, it's Saturday, of course, if you're not watching the shows here, the NBA slates go on here. We have a ton of content for that, for MLB, for all the sports that you are playing on the weekend. And yeah, over the weekend, one of our newer hosts, Ohtani, you're going to see on a lot more content here. Great Philadelphia radio host. If you want to follow him at Shander Show, you can do that. But yeah, I've never felt more pain in my soul than hearing Greg explain Money Time to another new employee who thought everybody had to do Money Time at the company, which I honestly might have been a funnier bit if you just made him do Money Time, and then I had to be like just uncomfortable that somebody else is taking my bit unwittingly.
That would have been really funny, but it was also because it was what happened was, I don't know how much you were paying attention. I know that you were in the chat at one point, but there was people who were posting like Money Time, like at the halfway mark, and he caught that. He's like, is there something you guys do halfway through the show? I was like, not we. But there's a particular person we work with who has set up the halfway point in a certain fraudulent way.
You got to make it fun for yourself here. That's what it's always about on the Awesemo YouTube channel, and for hopefully you guys playing DFS out there. So smash that like button here. Helps us out a bunch. Of course, subscribe to the channel because we have constant MLB content all day long. I'll actually be back in 4 hours doing the MLB Deeper Dive with Terry and Alex. Awesemo Baker coming up in a little bit. We have the NBA content as well. NBA Strategy Show, I'm sure, still going on right now. In addition to all the NBA shows coming up later today. So make sure you are hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. And of course, also make sure to go to oddshopper.awesemo.com. Another great place to be placing your bets and really shopping for odds. This is going to be one of the biggest advantages you have as a DFS player, as a sports bettor, all those things. And it all goes hand in hand, as you guys know by this point. But if you do go to oddshopper.awesemo.com or just oddshopper.com, I believe we also have that URL now too. You can see all the top bets on the day, some of the strikeout bets that we talked about on the tip-off show, the other home run bets, home run props. All those things are going to be giving you a lot of value if you are playing DFS, prepping DFS. Might as well check for the best lines out there according to the plays you're trying to make that day. So go to oddshopper.awesemo.com, check it out, because a big asset in your tool belt to win money in DFS and sports betting is going to be there for you guys. And of course, if you're ever not able to watch your favorite Awesemo shows on YouTube, make sure to check out the Awesemo Podcast Network at awesemo.com/podcast. And also, if you leave a 5-star review on any of our podcasts with your Twitter handle or your email address, you'll be eligible to win a free week of Awesemo Plus Platinum, and one winner gets awarded every Friday as well. So go check out the podcast, subscribe to a few, leave a few positive reviews on there, and you can also win that free week free week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. So go check that out right now at awesemo.com/podcast. Greg, any overarching thoughts on the slate? It does seem like a not fantastic pitching slate, and the good pitchers we have are going to be in some less than ideal spots for the most part. But any sort of overarching things that you thought about while, I don't know, just reviewing everything, or do you want to just go game by game?
Well, first, there's a lot of weather concerns on tonight's slate. So that's something that's going to impact it a lot. We've got a decently high chance of rain in the Brewers-Phillies game. There's rain in the weather report for Dodgers-Cubs. Those are the two that seem to be the most at risk, but then also a little bit of rain, unfortunately, in the Coors Field game, Giants-Rockies. So yeah, it's just going to be something to keep an eye on. For right now, there's nothing that looks like it's so bad that I'm going to take out of my player pool, but definitely something throughout the day I'm going to keep my eye on. And then if there's any games that do look, really bad, I'll make a note of it in our premium Slack chat.
I'm really curious why White Castle is trending on social media. Oh, I guess opening day for White Castle in Orlando, and people are lined up for literal miles to go get their tiny hamburgers. So good for White Castle.
Yeah, that was not a turn I expected this to take.
I was opening Twitter to see if there's any news items that I might have missed while we were going on here, but I assume you're not a big White Castle fan. It's fine. I'll just keep that to myself.
No, I have not eaten White Castle since high school, I think.
Oh, well, lucky you. All right, let's keep going through here. We got the first game on the slate, another one with major weather concerns up top, red on most of the radar so far, but we'll hit it up top in the hopes that it does go off. Milwaukee getting 4.3 implied runs against Vince Velasquez. And Vince Velasquez, we've talked about a lot on these shows, a guy who has still maintained good strikeout stuff, actually better strikeout stuff over the last season and change up to a 30% K rate. But he's not been pitching deep into games this year, 3.3 innings pitched per start, and also just has had a short hook because he's constantly giving up walks, constantly giving up some of the negative pitch count things that you don't want to see. But on the slate, Greg, we do have Vince Velasquez having a 14% chance of being a top pitcher, only 16% ownership. So it does seem not too over leveraged here. And if this game goes off going against Milwaukee, and even with lineups where you have Christian Yelich in, which is the expectation today, I still think going to Velasquez, if this game were to play, is a decent spot to at least try your luck. 7 guys who strike out above league average in the lineup, a 29% aggregate K rate, which is being aided a bit by having Adrian Hauser in the 9-hole with a 65% K rate. But still, a lot of ways for Velasquez to get strikeouts, a lot of ways for him to get dinged up as he does every single start. But are you with the top pitcher still here? Because it did jump out to me. Velasquez having a 14% chance of being a top pitcher, kind of surprising to see on any slate.
Yeah, well, I think it goes to a couple of things. Number one, the Brewers have a bad offense, and they also strike out a ton. Something else that should be noted here, by the way, I'll read off these numbers before I get into it a little bit more, but 77 WRC plus for the Brewers and a 26.8% strikeout rate against right-handed pitching this year. So they've been one of the worst offense in baseball against righties this season, and they're also really popular. We've got the Brewers right now with 6% chance being the top scoring team on the slate, but 9% ownership. So this is one of the highest owned offenses on the entire slate right now. So not only do I think Milwaukee's a team to be underweight to, but to your point right there about Vince Velasquez, a really high variance pitcher. But like we said, he's coming up with less ownership relatively than what the Brewers have. So, I mean, to me, if I have to play one side, I slightly lean towards the Velasquez side, especially because the pitching isn't really all that great on this slate. We have Tyler Glass now is an obvious pay-up option, but it's a really tough matchup for him at Los Angeles. And then beyond that, I mean, Shohei Ohtani, he's been inconsistent. Kenta Maeda, he's been inconsistent this year. So Vince Velasquez at a $7,000 price tag on DK, I think makes sense as a low priority SP2. No reason to consider on Fanduel on a single pitcher site, though.
Yeah, I would agree there. And yeah, Vince Velasquez, somebody 17 fantasy point projection today from Awesemo, definitely a nice number to be looking at his price tag on DraftKings. So if you get some, I would be definitely reluctant to get too crazy over the field and certainly watch the weather in this game. But it does seem like a slate we're going to Velasquez, not the worst idea. Not a huge slate. And as Greg mentioned, it's pitching, not the most reliable across the board. On Milwaukee's side, they do have a decent chance to be a top stack today. Better chance to be a top value stack, a 15% probability there to be the top value on the slate according to Awesemo's top stacks tool that you can always get for yourself at awesemo.com/join. But besides that, though, they're going to be decently owned. They're going against Velasquez, who does give up a good amount of power overall, a 226 ISO since 2019, a 9% barrel ball rate over the last season. So there is some power upside for Milwaukee if this game goes off, Greg. I think this is a spot to me where if I'm getting that 15 to 20% Velasquez, I do want to make sure to get some Milwaukee stacks just to hedge.
Yeah, I just don't want to be overweight to the field on them because in our top stacks tool, like I said, they look really overowned. This is the team with one of the worst leverage scores on the slate. There's only a handful of teams that are worst right now in terms of ownership to projected odds being a top stack. So I don't have an issue with getting to some Milwaukee, especially some of the cheap left-handers. But as a stack, I don't have that much interest in them relative to what the field is at on them. But then some individual plays that I do think stand out, bringing up my Milwaukee exposure right now. Like Colton Wong on DraftKings, likely going to be leading off. He's only at 4,100. Travis Shaw, who's shown some power upside this year, inconsistent, but still has the ability to hit homers and homered yesterday. He's homered in 2 of the last 3 games. He's only 3,500. So those are the 2 guys that I'm getting the most exposure to from Milwaukee right now.
Yeah, certainly Christian Yelich going to be very highly owned here, over 25% ownership expected on DK. So obviously a Brewer stack without Christian Yelich, a lot less appealing than you would like to see, but that is one way to get lower ownership on your Brewer stack if you do want to take the rest of the crap that's in their lineup. But still, that is one thing to point out. Everybody else going to be decently owned, but not quite as owned. Colton Wong, who Greg just mentioned, 11%. Dan Vogelbach, a little bit over 10. So that is going to be the highest owned stack, that Wong, Vogelbach, Yelich part of the Brewers lineup. On Philly's side, they're going against Adrian Hauser. Hauser's strikeout stuff has really kind of fallen off of a cliff over the last season. An 18% K rate since 2020. Since 2019 was at a 22.2% K rate. Still under league average, but definitely showed some more upside. It does seem like for him, he's gotten more ability, more utility out of just being a guy who avoids fly balls. A 19% fly ball rate over the last season, giving up a lot of soft contact. Hauser, to me, is a guy, Greg, where on the slate, I could see playing a little bit, but the projection is pretty ugly, and you're just kind of hoping for a game where he avoids hard contact in a park that's certainly going to aid hard contact and power a little bit more. How are you feeling about Hauser here? Because he really low top pitcher odds, but I just feel like on this kind of slate, I wouldn't mind getting just a little bit in the hopes that he hangs in and doesn't give up a ton of damage.
He's way too expensive for me at 8,600. And then there's something to consider too about Hauser in terms of what this means for potential Philly stacks. Like I said, Hauser's solid this year. He doesn't generally work all that deep into games though. So you do worry about maybe he only gets, 2.5 times through the order. They take him out, and the Brewers have a really excellent bullpen behind him. So Hauser at 8,600 on DraftKings, it's hard for me to envision that he actually has a significant amount of upside at that price point. Also, Philly presents a pretty difficult matchup, but just given that Hauser's good enough to limit the damage on his own, and then there's good bullpen behind him, I don't really want to stack up the Phillies either.
Yeah, that's reasonable. And a 3-run shot in the chat asking Yelich and Kane back tonight. I think it's just Yelich expected back, but obviously keep your eyes on the lineup and in the game itself, because this is one of those ones that we talked about earlier in the show. The weather going to be one to watch very closely. Definitely red on every other site you're going to be looking at for MLB DFS weather. Let's talk about the Philly hitters, though, Greg, because you mentioned the spot against Hauser, and it is a team that is going to be a little bit overowned according to the top stacks tool are these Phillies hitters. But Hauser himself, as we mentioned, just giving up not a lot of power, not a lot of fly balls, also not striking guys out. So maybe there's some ways for the Phillies to get there, the 4.7 point implied run total for them. That said, going against the bullpen for Milwaukee, their bullpen's actually been pretty good. Kind of surprisingly high 29% K rate for that Milwaukee bullpen over the last season. I feel like going to Philly seems fine here, but they're pretty chalkily owned for a team that, especially the good hitters, Harper, Real Muto. I guess Rhys Hoskins not too highly owned, but he's also not as good against righties as he is against lefties. I feel like Philly, to me, I don't love the ownership for these guys, and I also don't love the stack itself. So to me, this would be a team where I honestly wouldn't mind the game just getting rained out because I just don't want to play a lot of Philly.
Yeah, and they're really expensive too, right? I mean, Bryce Harper, 5,800. Rhys Hoskins, 5,200. JT Realmuto, 5,300. So these are guys you have to pay a lot for. And like I said, I don't think it's a great spot. I don't think there's all that much upside. They're negatively leveraged. If I had to roster one of them, Andrew McCutchen, who's been leading off, he's only 4,100 on DraftKings. He's also fairly cheap on Fanduel. So that's the one, at least on a points per dollar basis, looks to be the best. But as a whole, I don't have a lot of interest in the Phillies bats.
All right, let's keep going through here and smash that like button, guys. We appreciate it a bunch. You guys know for MLB, tough this time of year to compete with all the NBA going on. Obviously, we all love that sport too, but MLB, we want to make sure it gets its time in the sun and gets seen by the people out there who need some quality MLB content. So make sure to hit that like button and, of course, subscribe to the channel to check out all the stuff we have going on all day long. Next game up, another particularly weather-affected game, potentially the Cubs game against the Dodgers. The wind blowing out slightly in Wrigley, 7 miles per hour blowing out, but it does seem like a decent chance of rain here, so watch the news for this one closely. Dodgers a 4.9 implied run total for now going against Kyle Hendricks. Hendricks, another pitcher who does mostly avoid really any sort of damage overall. Just a 162 ISO allowed since 2019. The home run rate for him has come up a little bit over the last season, up to a 4.7% home run rate, but he doesn't get strikeouts. Hendricks as a pitcher, Greg, I feel like going against the Dodgers, if this game were to go off, I don't see a lot of utility going to Hendricks. He does seem underowned in the top stacks tool, but if you got more than 5%, I feel like that 5% cap would be more than enough for me of Kyle Hendricks.
Kyle Hendricks has been really bad this year. So I know the way that you look at the numbers is you're looking at, like more than just this season of data, and you're looking at last year also. But I don't think Hendricks is the same pitcher this year that he was last year. And just everything about him is so much different in terms of makeup. Number one, his average fastball velocity is now below 87 miles per hour. And that has not been the case the last few years. He came into the league throwing just under 90, so he was never a hard thrower. But now his average fastball velocity is all the way down to 86.9 miles per hour. His ground ball rate has fallen off a cliff. So last year, 47.1% ground ball rate, right in line with his career average, 47.1% ground ball rate. This year, 31.6% ground ball rate. So he's not generating ground balls, and he has a 35.7% home run to fly ball rate. So we have a guy who's no longer generating ground balls. He's giving a lot more fly balls, and more of those fly balls are leaving the park for homers, which is why you look at his numbers this year. 7.54 ERA, a 7.46 expected ERA, an 8.32 FIP. Like Kyle Hendricks just goes out there and gets his face kicked in every 5 days. So I look at that in a really tough matchup against the Dodgers. And I know there is a history of Hendricks being a quality starting pitcher. I just don't think he's that guy anymore. And if you look at our top stacks, we have the Dodgers with the third best odds being the highest scoring team on the slate, the second best of any non-Coors Field game. So Coors Field looks like it's going over-owned, but of the games outside of Coors Field, the Cleveland Indians, Los Angeles Dodgers look like the best team to stack. But I think there's a chance that Kyle Hendricks is washed, and that's definitely one of the reasons I want to get to the Dodgers.
It is interesting because I think, and that's sometimes sort of the calls that people have to make for the sample sizes and all of that, where for me, like I'm not even looking at just 2021 stats right now because I do pull 2020 and 2021, and then I pull back for 2019. And normally I do think that does add value, but I agree that there could be some blind spots. Like just for comparison's sake, going back to last season, I have Hendricks at a 1.16 whip, which is not that far off. Going back to 2019, a 1.14 whip. Since last season, he's had an 87.4 mile per hour fastball. And then going back to 2019, he actually had an 87.1 mile per hour fastball. So it is interesting. And I think maybe that is something that might be worth me just incorporating just from a frame of reference when talking about the stuff with you. But I would think right now, I still would expect him to regress a little more towards the normal mediocrity he's had. But you're right. I mean, even just as I mentioned, the longer term sample going back to last season, home run rate is up from 3.4% to 4.7%. So there could be some troubling things that just haven't fully materialized across, the 420 batters that he's faced, but maybe a little more present in the 2021 numbers. So keep that in mind if you are playing Kyle Hendricks. Either way, we're definitely not advocating for him. For the Dodgers, though, if this game were to play, wind blowing out, a team with a lot of power here, 212 aggregate ISO in their projected lineup, I really think the Dodgers stack, even though they are pretty close to appropriately owned, would be a team that I'd want to target today, just because maybe the weather, if the game does go, people drop that ownership down a little bit. Seems like a pretty good spot. Right now, it seems like a lot of the ownership on DraftKings going to Mookie Betts, Corey Seager, and Will Smith. And I have no issue going to Justin Turner, Max Muncy as well. I think obviously there are so many quality hitters in the Dodgers lineup that when there's ownership going mostly just three guys, I have no issue making that a 5-man stack more or just taking a different three guys. But the Dodgers, Greg, I feel like one of the more appealing stacks in the slate, assuming this game does play.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, I think there's a chance that Kyle Hendricks is just not a very good pitcher anymore. He's on the wrong side of 30. Also, like we said, the velocity is a little bit on the downside. And then something else also that kind of stands out with Kyle Hendricks, he rarely walked guys in previous seasons. And the last 3 years, 5.4% walk rate, 4.4. Last year, only a 2.5% walk rate. He only walked a handful of guys the entire season. 7.4% walk rate so far this year. So he's putting a lot more guys on base when he's giving up all those increased home runs. So, to me, the Dodgers are definitely a pretty high priority team for me today. You mentioned some of the popular guys. And Max Muncy, also somebody throw in there who's much cheaper than he should be, in my opinion, on DraftKings at 4,300. And then AJ Pollock, he hit a grand slam yesterday. He's only at 3,500. He's cheap on both Fanduel and DraftKings. So I think he's somebody to throw in for not a whole bunch of ownership that would be able to, number one, save us some money on our stack and also differentiate it a little bit. So AJ Pollock is somebody who hits towards the bottom of the order, but I'm still willing to get to him.
On the other side, we got Walker Buehler, who does, according to the top stack, still look significantly overowned, but still a pitcher who has been getting decent results for enough of a period of time since 2019, a 28.6% K rate since the last season and change, a 27% K rate. And on some of the slates recently, I think we've talked about Walker Buehler as being not quite as good as some of the other stars that we talk about very often. On this slate, it's Tyler Glasnow, just a guy with a higher strikeout rate, Garrett Cole, Jacob deGrom. And I think sometimes Buehler gets treated like those guys, even though he's not quite the same tier. But Buehler on this slate, I would have no issue besides the high ownership here. He's also given up a little more in the way of home runs recently, up to a 4.1% home run rate since last season, which gives me a little bit of concern if this game does go on and you have the wind blowing out at Wrigley. To some extent, obviously, is not going to be as crazy as some of the other wind games you're going to find at Wrigley Field, but still 7 miles per hour is a notable number here. I don't think going to Buehler, I wouldn't mind it very much, but he's overowned. So I think this is another play that I would want to come in a little bit short on, Greg, even not accounting for the weather issues.
Yeah, so first, here's the good news. The Chicago Cubs this year, 93 WRC plus and a 26.7% strikeout rate against right-handed pitching. On the bad side, though, Walker Buehler has struggled a little bit to open the season so far. His strikeout rate is down. Last year, he struck out 10.31 hitters per 9 innings. The year before, 10.61. This year, he's only striking out 8.9 hitters per 9 innings. And even though he's a 3.16 ERA, some of the underlying numbers, he has a 4.48 expected ERA. So that's a little bit concerning. He's definitely been buoyed by an unsustainable strand rate of nearly 80%. So eventually some of those guys that he's allowing to get on base are going to start scoring. And he's been lucky that hasn't been the case to this point. But I'm trying to figure out just like what it could be that he's not generating as many strikeouts. For one, his velocity is down a pretty decent amount this year. So maybe that's a little bit of a red flag. Last year, 96.8 average fastball velocity. This year, all the way down to 95.5, which is by far the lowest of his career. So his swinging strike rate, see how much has that changed. His swinging strike rate has gone from... that really hasn't changed materially, 12.3% to 11.9%. So that would actually suggest to me that the strikeout should be a little bit more in line this year than last year. The drop in velocity is a little bit of a concern. Here's the one thing I'll say about Walker Buehler for the slate overall as a play, though, is that he's picking up almost the exact same amount of ownership as Tyler Glasnow. We have 25% projected ownership for Glasnow, 25.7% projected ownership for Walker Buehler. But we have Glasnow with almost double the odds of landing in the optimal lineup, being one of the top two pitchers on the slate right now. So I have like a very small amount of interest in Walker Buehler, but I'm going to be massively underweight to the field relative to what his ownership is. And I prefer Tyler Glasnow by a pretty wide margin.
Yeah, definitely going to be a tougher situation for Glasnow, though. I guess, that could be subject to the wind and Wrigley and all that. But I would agree. I think that Buehler's strikeout stuff has not been the best. The fact he's given up more power and also, facing a Cubs team that's not quite the Angels, but still has quality hitters in there. I agree. Just coming under on Buehler to me seems like a wise move today, not even accounting for the weather. And again, the weather in this one is a concern, so make sure to pay attention to everything. But the Cubs on their side, the stack right now, not the highest probability to be a top stack today, but also no ownership expected. Only a 3.6 point implied run total for these guys. So I feel like, to me, Greg, the Cubs stack, not the most appealing here. I guess as somebody who doesn't believe that much in Walker Buehler, I wouldn't mind getting a little bit, but it's sort of hard, even with me feeling Buehler is not the best pitcher. I think he's not the best pitcher in terms of having high fantasy upside on a slate where you do have Glasnow in a risky spot, but still one where the strikeout stuff's been a lot better for him. The Cubs, I think, can get there, but I just don't have the highest confidence level where if I got some, it wouldn't be crazy. But I think to me, it wouldn't be the wildest thing either. Just completely avoid the Cubs today.
Yeah, I mean, maybe people be a little bit more bullish on the Cubs just because I scored 1 million runs over the weekend. But even so, I mean, like Walker Buehler, even if I think that he is not the best starting pitching option overall on the slate, it doesn't mean he isn't good, right? I'm just talking about him relative to price tag and relative to some of the other guys that we have on the slate and also relative to what his ownership is. But still, at worst, Walker Buehler probably is the second best starting pitcher on the slate overall behind Tyler Glasnow. The Cubs have had a bad offense against right-handed pitching this year. So to me, the Cubs are not a team I want to stack.
All right, let's keep going through here. We got Texas getting 3.3 implied runs against Kenta Maeda. And this is a spot, too, where it is going to be at Minnesota. So keep that in mind if you are thinking about Kenta Maeda. Coldish day, 60-degree day in Minnesota for the spot going against Texas team that has 6 guys that strike out above league average, 25% aggregate K rate in their lineup today. And the result here is that Kenta Maeda, to me, I think a very appealing play. The field is going to think the same, though. About a third of the field on Draftkings, a little bit less than that, is going to be on Kenta Maeda. But I really don't have a ton of issue here. His strikeout stuff has been better than Walker Buehler over the last season. 27.8% K rate for Maeda. Easier matchup. I think less weather concerns in this one, unless I'm missing something with Minnesota. But still a spot here for Maeda, Greg, that I feel like he's a much better option at $1,800. I mean, maybe not much better. That might be a little bit of a strong choice, but I would say significantly better option than Walker Buehler for that much cheaper with comparable numbers and a better matchup.
Yeah, so here's one thing else. The Texas Rangers have actually had a much better than expected offense this year. They have a 109 WRC plus against right-handed pitching so far. And Kenta Maeda, his numbers, once again, another guy who was great last year, but he's fallen off in a pretty big way so far this year. And also velocity slowly trending down. He's also a little bit of an older pitcher, but the last 3 years, Kenta Maeda, 92.2 average fastball velocity. Last year, 91.8. This year, right at 91.3. So trending down a little bit. And then so far to open the year, 6.56 ERA, a 5.25 expected ERA, 6.2 FIP. His strikeouts have gone down from 10.8 strikeouts per 9 innings last year to 7.71 strikeouts this year. His strikeout rate is almost halved. So last year, 32.3% strikeout rate. This year, 17.9% strikeout rate. And it's such a tough spot because, like, just on paper, and I agree, if you look at the numbers over this year and last year, and even going back before that, Kenta Maeda, looks really good overall, but he's also a pitcher who's 33 years old, just turned 33. So maybe there's reason to think he's a little bit on the downside with the velocity decreasing. He is right now the second most popular pitcher on the slate behind Shohei Ohtani. Kenta Maeda, we've projected for nearly 30% ownership on DraftKings. For leverage, I kind of like stacking the Rangers here. Like I said, they've hit well against right-handed pitching so far this year. They only have a 1.7% projected ownership share. So I'm going to get a little bit of exposure to Kenta Maeda, but once again, less than the field. But I like the Rangers as a leverage and contrarian stack, just based on they've fared fairly well against right-handed pitching this year, and Maeda struggled.
I guess that's reasonable. I would still expect, Maeda to regress a little more to the numbers that we've seen over the last season and change, where for him, going back to last season, his swinging strike rate was actually up. He was up to a 16.2% swinging strike rate compared to a 15.2 going back to 2019. His chase rate was also up to 39.9% from 36.6 going back to 2019. So I think Maeda, to me, I'm more of a believer in than you are, but I guess, and I also think too, Texas has been really buoyed by having Adolis Garcia raking the ball to start, and I don't know that means that the team is better. It just means they've been getting better results in part because of having this one guy who's been hitting a lot of bombs, or at least a lot of bombs relative to the Rangers. I would push back on Maeda a little bit more than a guy like Kyle Hendricks, but that to me is I'm more a believer in chalk Maeda, and I think the ownership either way we would agree is probably a little bit lofty. The Rangers, though, not very lofty ownership for them. They do have higher odds of being a top stack and a higher odds of being the top value stack on the day relative to their overall ownership, but they do have a lot of hitters who are mediocre up top. Nick Solak, I think, not a lot of power for him, and he's 4,900 on DK. That's a play that I wouldn't mind moving entirely, but the stack is pretty reasonably priced, Greg, so I could see your logic in wanting to go there. To me, it's not a great park, and Maeda, giving up more home runs than league average at 4.4% on run rate over the last season, I guess there's a case to be made. So go ahead and make the case for Texas and which bats would be a priority.
Yeah, so I mean, it's really just a case of, by the way, all my baseball slates that I've done well this year, it's basically I'm very rarely playing the chalk in MLB DFS. If there's a high-end pitcher like a Jacob deGrom, Max Scherzer, and those guys have been underpriced pretty much all year, that's the chalk I'm playing. Chalk offenses I'm rarely playing. And when there's a chalk pitcher as an SP2 that isn't necessarily an ace like Kenta Maeda, I just prefer to go elsewhere. And I think given that we've seen from the Texas Rangers, and sure, I mean, I think they're probably more likely to regress than keep this up, but like I said, they have a 109 WRC plus so far against right-handed pitching. Kenta Maeda has been awful so far to start the year. So I take all of that into account. The Rangers are one of the lowest projected teams in terms of ownership today. Kenta Maeda projected to be really popular. This is a spot that I like to attack, and it's a very high variance spot. It's something that could, more likely than not, is going to go poorly for me, except the times that it does go well, it is so much upside that even if this spot only hits, once a week, once every 2 weeks or so, it could be enough to win a GPP, and that makes it all worthwhile. So the Texas Rangers with this kind of 1% ownership, definitely something I like to be on. And here, I'll pull up my Rangers exposure to the players that I have popping up the most in my lineups right now. It is Joey Gallo is a one-off just for the power upside. Always makes sense. He's really cheap, especially on DraftKings at 3,500 for somebody with the power upside of Joey Gallo. You mentioned Adonis Garcia and the start that he's off to, but he's relatively cheap tonight. He's only 3,600 on DraftKings. We've got David Dahl, who's priced below 3K. So there's a whole bunch of hitters here that have power upside that are priced as if Kenta Maeda is the pitcher he was from last year. And that doesn't mean he can't get back to that spot, except he's been so poor this year that I don't think the Rangers hitters should be quite this cheap.
Okay, that's reasonable. And I guess one thing to put a cap on it all here is that Maeda, according to Awesemo, number 2 projected player on the slate, or number 2 projected pitcher on the slate, just behind Tyler Glass now. So if you want to get away from that, he's going to be a guy that pops up a lot in optimizer. You can do some of the Texas bats like Greg is saying. And if you are a believer in Maeda, then take that projection and feel some degree of confidence. So it's going to be like a lot of things in baseball, in a sport that has, the best guys having a 30% positive outcome, you are going to be able to decide for yourself. If you are a believer in Maeda regressing, you can go more towards Texas. And if you are a believer in Maeda, I think to be getting with the field's ownership is not the worst thing in the world. On the other side, you have Dane Dunning going against Minnesota, 4.7 implied runs for Minnesota today. And Dunning's stuff has been pretty good overall to start the year. He's only faced 238 batters, but a 25% K rate for him. Not a lot of home run power given up. Obviously, against Minnesota, that can go south at any moment here because you have so many guys who have a ton of power. This lineup today, in aggregate, 233 ISO for Minnesota. But Dunning, I think at his price point, I wouldn't mind taking a few stabs. He's pitching just shy of 5 innings per game. Not a great projection as a value pitcher. I think he's not terrible. Does have higher odds of being a top pitcher than his ownership, which is going to be completely nil on DraftKings. And Greg, I feel like as an SP2, maybe you feel strongly or maybe more strongly for Dunning than I do. But I think if you're not playing the Maedas of the world, saving that money and going to Dunning wouldn't be the craziest move.
Yeah, and then also I think he's on the opposite side of the game as Kenta Maeda, right? So let's say the Rangers win the game, then maybe get the winning bonus out of Dane Dunning. Also, I wouldn't consider him on Fanduel, but he's so cheap on DraftKings that if he does happen to pitch 5 innings and get the win, chances are he paid off his price tag when he's that cheap. But also Dunning, he's a guy who's gotten overlooked for almost all his starts this year and last year. Strikes out over a hitter per inning. The peripheral numbers all look good. So I don't think he's nearly as bad as the public seems to think. He's definitely he's not picking up ownership. The Twins as a stack are picking up a little bit of ownership. They're looking over leveraged. So as a contrarian option, I do like Dane Dunning here.
Yeah, Dane Dunning, when he gets into hot Texas days, maybe he regresses a little bit more, but there really haven't been any numbers that I would find too concerning so far. Not giving up a lot of hard contact, only a 31% hard contact rate. Home run rate for him has been just above 2%, so that's under league average. Everything for Dunning has looked pretty good. So yeah, I think we're on the same page then, at least with Dunning, that he's a worthwhile SP2 today. Minnesota, though, their stack, never an issue going there either. They are a little bit overowned according to the top stack tool, but it does seem like still a team that's worth getting exposure because you just look through and you have so many guys who have a ton of power. Josh Donaldson, Byron Buxton's been really raking this year in particular, but going back to 2019, still a 308 ISO versus righties. Nelson Cruz, a monster in his own right. Alex Kirilloff, the one thing he's done pretty well so far is hit right-handed pitching. 333 ISO for him in a limited series of at-bats, only 32 at-bats for him versus a righty so far, but Minnesota, Greg, I feel like a team hard to ignore completely, but still maybe a bit overowned, especially, if that ownership does go up as we get closer to lock.
Yeah, and also they're really expensive. So we have Minnesota with the second worst odds being the top value stack on the slate. The only team with worse odds being a value are the Chicago Cubs. And then also the Twins picking up a little bit of ownership, 5% ownership as a team. So like I said, I'm probably a little bit higher on the public in the field than Dane Dunning is. You are as well. So the Twins to me are a team that I would prefer to be underweight to the field on and not a team I really have interest in. And by the way, I don't know if you saw, but we did get a super chat.
Oh, do you want to read it, Greg? I did see. I honestly, it wasn't one of Kevin S's better ones, I would say.
No, like I was looking at it. It's like it's so shoehorned in. Like that's really that's really the issue. So like I don't know if you. So yeah, I realize that you said I am corny, and that's obviously the fake. But it's not even like a realistic fake name. Right? Like the whole thing doesn't make sense.
Talking about the roads, like the fact that we often debate, wow, did the team travel on this road for the game today? Does that affect?
Yeah, like, oh, wait, Spags, which highway did they take? Because that drastically impacts my projection of them. But the other way I was thinking about reading it really quick was I was going to say like, oh, Im Courtney, the Korean pitcher, and then just like moving on just to throw them off. But yeah, I mean, all right, we read the name, so maybe that'll make them happy that I said, and we could just cut that part. I'm corny. Right, there we go. We hit it. That's the part of the super chat I really want us to hit.
And that's also the issue. Like, I always do find it amusing. I guess I wouldn't say always. I usually find it amusing when he does submit these chats to the deeper dive, because like Loughy will read them, and usually Loughy isn't paying like the close attention. He's doing a million different things on that show. Whereas like for me, like I immediately sniff these out. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. You just want me to read a silly thing. If you want me to read a silly thing, I have no issue with it. But
no, it's just I wish it was a little more clever.
poor Kevin waking up early, putting in the grind here to do his bit of prank calling us like a young Bart Simpson, and instead we've just bashed him. But Kevin S., we appreciate you a bunch, not offended at all, and I hope that the I'm corny road works out well for the Cubs and all the prank chats. Next game up, we got the Mets. No, I don't have an implied run total for the Mets going against Adam Wainwright here. We do have Adam Wainwright, though, going to be a decent chance of being a top pitcher according to Awesemo's top stacks tool, top pitcher tool, which surprises me a bit here. 10% chance of being a top pitcher in the slate, only 5% ownership expected on DK. And Adam Wainwright, I feel like this price tag is not the most appealing, but man, it's hard to ignore the fact that he's got double a chance of being a top pitcher relative to his ownership. And I'm not a Wainwright fan, but a number like that does make me stand up and maybe think that I need to play some Wainwright today, even though he's not a guy that to me, nothing jumps out. Under league average strikeout rate, doesn't give up a lot of power, but maybe it's an ugly enough slate that Wainwright hang in there could be enough.
Yeah, it's hard for me to buy into him having a career high strikeout rate at age 39. Like Adam Wainwright, a former Cy Young type candidate pitcher, and now a guy who all of a sudden he's seen an uptick in his strikeout rate. By the way, also his velocity is up this year, which is a little bizarre. Also at age 39, makes me a little curious of what kind of Mexican supplements might this guy be taking right now? Because I mean, for you to be 39 years old and all of a sudden see a spike in velocity to strike it, an uptick in strikeout stuff, it's pretty wild. But overall, I'm just going to chalk this up to a small sample size. 28 innings pitched this year. I think he's going to regress. And the Mets have a really good offense. So Adam Wainwright, I understand the pitching options aren't the best for this slate. Certainly one pitcher slate, absolutely no reason to consider him. But even at 8,000 on DraftKings, to me, I understand we have him projected with better odds of being in the optimal lineup than what his ownership is, but it's not a spot I want to get to. I think that Adam Wainwright's going to regress going forward.
Yeah, I think that seems like a reasonable one. And also, it looks like the Mets implied totals 4.1 implied runs for them, but that wasn't pulled in because I don't think the Mets have a starting pitcher yet, which we'll talk about now, or I guess talk about in a second. The Mets hitters, though, Greg, does seem like they are a little bit underowned as a top stack today, going against Wainwright. And Wainwright also underowned. So how are you handling that one? Do you see yourself getting a good amount of Mets in a park that's, I would say, not really an upgrade and also not the warmest day either? So I don't see a ton of reason to love the Mets, but if Wainwright's ownership went up, I guess you could make the case a little bit more.
I have a little bit more ownership on the Mets than the field does. Field only roster them at 3.3%, and I think that's a number to get overweight to the field on, considering we have a 4.4% chance of them landing in the landing as the top scoring team on the slate. Like I said, Wainwright's been pretty solid this year, but I just have to expect a little bit of regression, just given that he's 39 years old and that his numbers, both just his ERA and his peripheral numbers, were not great over the last 3 years. So I'm just looking at everything we've seen from Wainwright so far as a small sample size and kind of writing it off. And I expect that Wainwright will return to the pitcher he was over the last few years, where he was a guy with, an expected ERA in the mid-4 range. So Wainwright, I think, is going to regress a little bit. He's certainly not one of the worst pitchers on the slate, so it's not like the Mets are going to be one of my high priority stacks. I know that Brian Claremont in the chat, he asked what I thought about the Dodgers, and like the Dodgers, that's a team I'm really prioritizing. The Mets are just a team I'm going to be slightly overweight to the field on.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And you haven't seen anything about the Mets pitcher, right? I didn't see it on any of the sites that I normally look at, so I don't even know how to approach what they're going to be going against for St. Louis.
Let's see if we have anything listed. But yeah, last I looked, the Mets did not have. Yeah, the Mets still haven't announced a starting pitcher, so I guess we just kind of have to go past it, and then we'll figure out later on in the day whether the Cardinals are a team to stack up or not.
Yeah, currently it does seem like the Cardinals like a little bit overowned according to the top stacks tool, but again, hard to fully know their potential here. 4.5 implied runs total for them, so not a bad number, especially in a park that mostly does favor the pitching. But definitely you need to know which hand and which pitcher you're facing today to really get a full assessment here. So keep your eye for that and tune into the deeper dive coming up at 12 p.m. West Coast time, 3 p.m. East Coast time, and we'll be talking about that more with Terry and Alex coming up in a few hours. But let's keep going through here. We got the Cleveland Indians getting 4.3 implied runs against Daniel Lynch. Daniel Lynch, I've looked at the minor league numbers, not the most impressive strikeout guy, but seems like mostly an average pitcher based on the minor league numbers, so probably a little bit below average as a major league pitcher, barring some sort of upgrade. And Daniel Lynch, a player that, Greg, I assume will not be in play for you at pitcher day, given we don't know how stretched out he is. It doesn't seem like he's a great strikeout guy. I think is a prospect of some note in the Royals organization. But do you have any thoughts at all on Daniel Lynch here?
So let's start with him as a prospect, because looking at the Fangraphs prospect list, he is overall the 3rd rated prospect in the Royals organization and 61st overall rated prospect in all of baseball. So that seems pretty favorable. But then you look at some of his projections for the season from projection sites, and it's, a guy who is projected for an ERA over 5 and only strike out about 6 hitters per 9 innings. So that's a little bit of a concern. Then you look at his minor league numbers. Something that's always a little iffy when we're looking at pitchers and their minor league numbers right now is that it's from a couple of years ago, and a lot of it's small sample size data. So we have 2019, Daniel Lynch pitching 78 innings in A-ball. I don't know how that translates to the big leagues at all. It's also 2 years ago. So there's a whole lot of uncertainty here, but here's at least the positive with Daniel Lynch. He's really, really cheap. So let me see. What exactly was his price tag on DraftKings? I don't have it in front of me. I think it was 4,400.
Yeah, he wasn't on. Oh, he's 4,000 flat, I think, on DraftKings, it looks like.
So for 4,000 flat, right? I mean, he's a highly regarded prospect. I don't know what to expect from him. Like, there's no way to really know for sure, but he's so cheap as a starting pitcher that even if he's just, moderately decent, like, he could be one of the best value plays on the slate. So it's hard for me to ignore any starting pitcher who's 4,000. So I'm going to have interest in him, but I also want to stack against him because he might not be good. We have so little data here.
Yeah, I think it's reasonable. The one thing that would give me some pause of taking Lynch, other than, the price tag being that cheap, I think you can sort of take a flyer on him and hope you just get a couple innings of not a couple, but like 3 or 4 innings of quality work, and maybe with a chance to get to 5. But he is facing an Indians team that only has a 19% aggregate strikeout rate in their lineup, and only 2 guys that strike out above league average. So if you want to play some Lynch, I agree he's probably worth the dart throw of just, hey, he's cheap, and maybe he opens up a construction that allows you to get to Glass now, gets to all the top stacks. So in that respect, I don't mind him, but it does seem like even, for a guy coming in and who has mediocre stuff, if he takes him by surprise, still not a lot of strikeouts there normally anyway. So that would be my concern. But also a positive for the Indian side of things. We're not a great run total, but they do have 11% chance of being the top stack today, 13% chance or a little bit less than that of being the top value stack and less ownership. And I think for me, I might be more inclined to go the Indian side, though they are very well represented. Guys like Jose Ramirez is going to be over 20%. The rest of the top four are going to be above 10% on DraftKings, but still lots of power to go around here. Guys like Jordan Luplow have also really just made their bones obliterating left-handed pitching. Luplow with a 355 ISO against lefties over the last couple seasons. I think the Indians are an appealing stack, Greg. I just feel like the ownership for them could get pretty ugly if you are including guys like Jose Ramirez, Luplow, Rosario, and Cesar Hernandez.
Yeah, I like both sides of this. I think there's so much uncertainty with Lynch. And this is what we saw the other day. I forget what the lefty who made his MLB debut for against Oakland the other day. But it was kind of a similar thing where I think I did the show with you where we had a guy who was making his MLB debut. We didn't have data on him going back for the last couple of years. And he ended up having a really solid game at fairly moderate ownership on a smaller slate on DraftKings. And I think that this could kind of be a similar situation with Lynch, where I don't know if he's any good or not, but that means that he could have a good game. He's also really cheap. It could mean the Indians are one of the best teams on the slate. And we do have the Indians with the best odds of being the top scoring team of the day, 10.6% odds of being the top stack. Also, even with their ownership at 10.6%. So both sides I want to be on here for sure, just because of all the uncertainty.
I also cannot remember who that was the other day, and it's really bothering me because I thought I could find it in my search history while you were talking, and it's not popping up. And I want credit for us being right about that.
Yeah, I can't. His name. If I look through
I feel like it was. Was it a Shane McClanahan?
Yeah, Shane McClanahan. That was it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was. He was a guy with a really high strikeout rate in the minor leagues, but also we didn't have data since 2019, and it was like, hey, who knows what's going to happen here? But it was something that appeared to have upside on both sides, and I feel very similarly about this situation.
And I do think McClanahan had a little better strikeout stuff, but I think he made a good case here. Just the price point, taking a stab on a guy. And it's also worth noting too, that first start can be bad for a pitcher, but they just don't know the guy's stuff sometimes, especially when you don't have a sample size over the last season and change for them to look at and know, hey, this is what Lynch throws, this is what he's going to get. So if you can't take any by surprise, it would be that first start. But I just think that Cleveland not offering up a lot of strikeouts normally for major league caliber competition, I find it hard to believe. You give up more strikeouts for a guy coming out of the minors who has not thrown enough to really know. But on the other side, we have Cleveland going Aaron Savall going for Cleveland against Kansas City, 4.2 implied runs for them. And Savall, his best strength, it does seem, is going to be not giving up a lot of production here. The strikeouts for him under league average. Home run rate for him been a little bit above league average, but Savall just another mediocre pitcher on a slate full of them. I don't see the need to get there a bunch, though he does have twice the chance of being a top pitcher than its ownership right now. To me, this is one to watch closely because Savall, you can make the case for more if he's going to be under owned, but just nothing jumps out meaningfully for me. So if he gets over owned, I wouldn't play him. If he's under owned, I would play him.
Yeah, so one of the other issues too is he's really expensive relative to his strikeout potential. So this year, striking out 6.95 hitters per 9 innings. Last year, struck out 8.39 hitters per 9 innings. His rookie year, struck out 7.18 hitters per 9 innings. So he does a pretty good job of limiting damage. For his career, he's a 3.54 ERA, is a 2.94 ERA this season. But there just isn't enough strikeouts there for me to really think this is a whole bunch of upside in a guy who has an 8,900 price tag on DraftKings. So to me, no interest in Savali. And then on the other side with the Royals, I think that he's a good enough pitcher to where he's going to be able to limit the damage. Also, the wind is blowing in Kansas City. So to me, I think that unlike the other side where I wanted to be on both sides, I want to be off both sides here.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable way to look at it. Kansas City side going to be very low probability of being a top stack today, and they are over-owned anyway. So I'm with you on that side. It does seem, though, like all the ownership for the Kansas City stack is going to be coming from Salvador Perez, who has been a power hitter by, really that's what he's doing best and out of the entire Royals lineup, and really one of the better power hitting catchers, but so expensive. I'm surprised that 10% of the field is going to be playing Salvador Perez at over 5K. And this Royals stack, the top three, all three guys over 5K on DraftKings. I find it hard to get to the Royals just because of those price tags, and the guys who are cheaper are going to be not as good of a hitters. I guess Jorge Soler is one guy who's a little bit cheaper, but still has some pop. But you're talking about Ryan O'Hearn, you're talking about Hunter Dozier, guys who have been a little bit less effective recently. What utility do you see in the Kansas City stack at all? And I guess, are you buying in on a 10% owned Salvador Perez at over 5K?
No, especially because we're running short on time. Like, this is just a team I don't have interest in. So okay. I'll leave it at that. It's Savala's a good pitcher. And then I mean, the Royals, like we have them with one of the lowest odds being top scoring team on the slate, and they're expensive.
Yep, they are very expensive. Let's keep going here. We got San Francisco 4.5 implied runs against Herman Marquez playing in Coors here. So that Giant stack is going to be well represented today. Does look a little bit overowned, but also has a 20% chance or a little bit under that of being the top value stack on the day because they are not priced up for whatever reason. Guys like Mike Tauchman going to be hitting in the 2-hole or projected hitting the 2-hole at $2,000 on DraftKings is going to be a tough value to miss out on. But Marquez, let's talk about him quickly. I don't see this being a great Marquez spot just because I do think the Giants have enough power. There are some strikeouts in the lineup, so maybe you might want to make that case more, but I think I'd be more inclined for Giants bats than Marquez, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, just like what the hell is this pricing, right? Like, I just don't, did the pricing algorithm not pick up this was a Coors Field game? Like, because it's legitimately bizarre. Like the Giants are going over-owned relative to their odds of being a top stack on the slate, but it doesn't matter when their odds of being the top value team on the slate are so high. It's really hard for me to ignore some of these guys. Like Mike Tauchman, if he's going to be batting second and he hit towards the top of the lineup yesterday, he homered. Like at min price on DraftKings, that's ridiculous. So it's a team that they have a 10% chance being the top stack on the slate, 13% overall ownership. So that's over leveraged, but when it's nearly 20% odds being the top value, at the very least, I'm going to be getting to a whole bunch of these guys as one-offs.
Yeah, I think they look like a very strong stack today. And the highest owned guys are going to be Dickerson, Tauchman, and Brandon Belt. So those are, omit one of those guys if you want to get different. But the value being offered by Dickerson at 3,500 in the leadoff spot, Tauchman at 22,000 in the number 2 hole. There's a lot of value to be had here. And even Steven Duggar, 2,100 in the 8 slot, I think is not a terrible play, though obviously not as good as those other guys. Lots of ways to save money playing the Giants, even though they are playing in Coors. Colorado side does have a higher implied run total, though 5 implied runs for them going against Aaron Sanchez. And I feel like, to me, if I were going to fade one of the Coors teams, or at least come under on one of the Coors teams, I would come under on the Colorado side a little bit more, just because Sanchez, the one thing he has going for him is that he does keep that ball down. Obviously in Coors, that could be a different situation, but it is a cold day in Coors too, only 45 degrees today. So I feel like Sanchez being able to keep that low fly ball rate, low home run rate, only a 1% home run rate over the last season and change. Obviously that's going to come up a little bit, but I think, to me, Sanchez, not a crazy SP2 to throw in for a little bit, not a lot of exposure there. But I think really the main thing for me is that I don't mind not playing a lot of Colorado, or at least not as much as the field.
Yeah, like it's hard to avoid Charlie Blackmon when he's 3,700 at home at Coors Field, but a lot of the other bats are priced appropriately. Trevor Story, 5,600. He also got hit by a pitch yesterday, and I'm not sure he's going to end up playing today. He had to leave the game early yesterday, but CJ Cron, 4,600. Ryan McMahon, 5,100. Like, these guys are all priced for a Coors Field game. Charlie Blackmon is a one-off at 3,700 on DraftKings. That's just an incorrect price.
I'm made it happen. Also saying it's pretty snowy in Colorado right now. I don't know if he's there, but yeah, it does seem like a cooler day in Colorado. And that's something too, where when it does heat up in Colorado, you're getting an added bonus as well. So something to keep in mind, where people are saying Coors has been underperforming this year, or people are sleeping on Coors. It does tend to be a little bit worse, much like anything, any other park across the country. When it's colder out, it's not quite as good, even though obviously the air there is going to make it still a better hitting environment than most other parks. Let's keep going here. We got Tampa Bay, 3.8 implied runs against Shohei Ohtani. As Greg mentioned earlier in the show, Shohei Ohtani, another of the chalk pitchers on the slate, does look overowned according to the top stacks tool, but we've talked about Ohtani a couple times on the show so far. His strikeout numbers have been crazy. His control has been mediocre, to say the best, but a 33% K rate for him so far this season. Velocity has been pretty strong, over 96 miles per hour. The XFIP, though, 4.9 XFIP, does seem like there are worse things to come for him. I just don't know that's going to come today against Tampa Bay, Greg, who does have some guys that strike out, 25% aggregate K rate in their lineup, 5 guys that strike out above league average. I don't mind Ohtani here. The price point kind of baffling for the most part. I guess the main thing is that Ohtani's not pitching that deep into games, but still, to me, a play that I think I would personally favor Maeda, but I assume you might go the other way.
Yeah, I prefer Ohtani just because of the overall stuff and strikeout upside. I mean, Ohtani, if he could just throw strikes, like he's been a disaster keeping the ball in the zone. But the real reason that he's not working deep into games, it's not because he's some like crazy restrictive pitch limit. It's because he's striking out 15.15 hitters per 9 innings and walking 8.56 hitters per 9 innings. So it takes him so many pitches to get guys out because he's walking guys, he's striking guys out, he's all over the place. But the stuff is still so good, even coming off of an elbow injury. And then obviously last year only pitched 1.2 innings. There was definite concern for me. What is this velocity going to look like this year? It's 97.1 average fastball velocity for him. So even up from his first full season as a starting pitcher, up from when it was 96.7. So the stuff's definitely there. There's probably just a little bit of rust there, and I think that's what's contributing to his inability to find the strike zone. But because of the upside and the cheap price, I think he's a good SP2 option.
The one cause for concern for me is that he's been getting hit pretty hard when he is getting hit, a 45% hard contact rate, and playing at his home stadium is one of the better power parks in the league that people still don't really catch up on. So it wouldn't be shocking to me to see him have some downside power days where I just think he's going to regress in the amount of home runs he's given up in a pretty big way at some point. But that to me is, still not worth or not too big of a concern relative to the strikeout rate. So getting to Ohtani some seems like a better move. And I would favor Maeda. Greg would favor Ohtani. I think you can sort of make your own choices there. Tampa Bay's hitters, though, I wouldn't mind taking the stab just because the high ownership on Ohtani. I think there are some guys here who can do damage to him. But Greg, real fast, how are you feeling about Tampa Bay's stack? They seem mostly appropriately owned according to the top stack. So maybe a better chance of being a top value stack than their actual probability to be a top stack today.
Yeah, I mean, just for leverage, because I think I'm going to be playing a lot of Ohtani, I'm going to be getting to a few Tampa Bay Rays stacks, but once again, not a core piece of my lineups. Like you said, about appropriately owned, 3.5% chance of being a top stack on the slate, and then 3.7% ownership share. They're also fairly cheap across the board, so it's not hard to get to them in stacks and then pay up to pitching, but I'm probably not going to be that much different in the field. Probably somewhere in the neighborhood of, like 3 or 4% of my lineups will be Rays stacks.
And on the other side, we have Tyler Glasnow, 3.8 implied runs for the Angels today. And it does seem like Glasnow actually a little bit under-owned, which is rare for a stud pitcher. A guy with a 39% K rate is a tough matchup. But I think Glasnow, to me, a core play today. And if he's going to be under-owned on the slate, which, we'll see how the ownership looks closer to lock. But he has a 28% chance of being the top pitcher right now, 25% ownership. Glasnow, to me, looks undervalued. And as a stud pitcher on a slate with no stud pitchers at all, I think going heavier to Glasnow would be a move that I would be very comfortable with.
Yeah, and I guess it's just a thing where people are afraid of the matchup because his numbers this year are terrific, and he's so much better than all the other starting pitchers on the slate. And the strikeout stuff is so good that, we've seen games where Tyler Glasnow gives up runs, and it doesn't even really matter for his fantasy production because he cancels a lot out by striking guys out. And it's not even like he's giving up that many runs this year. He's a 1.67 ERA, but last year, probably a little bit more apt comparison where he's one of the best DFS pitchers in the league, even though he had a 4.08 ERA because he struck out 14.28 hitters per 9 innings. When you strike out that many guys, you have a lot of wiggle room for being able to allow runs because he could give up 4 runs or something like that, and he strikes out 12 guys. It doesn't matter. It's still a good fantasy outing. So this is a slate that is pretty barren for starting pitching, even though we have 10 games. So, with that in mind, Tyler Glasnow is almost certainly going to be my most rostered player today.
It is a tough matchup for him, so that's something to keep in mind here, but you're taking the arm talent on a slate where there isn't a lot of it. But on the Angels side, you do have a team with only 3 guys that strike out above league average, a 19.5% aggregate K rate in their lineup, and it's going to be tough sledding for Glasnow, or, tougher sledding than he's usually facing. Are you willing to get some Angel stacks in here? Because they do have a pretty low probability to be a top stack, but even less ownership expected. I guess the only guy getting owned is Ohtani, and you're not, well, that's the one thing that's always tough is that you cannot get him as a hitter on DraftKings, and you can't get him as a starting pitcher, but it does mess up the stack a little bit, but you could still get to guys like Fletcher, Trout, Rendon. Are you getting any Angel stacks for yourselves with even having Ohtani in the 2-hole, probably messing up the stack correlation a little bit more than you'd like to see?
No, because you have, Trout's clearly the best hitter on the team, but then Ohtani and Rendon are kind of like 2A, 2B. So and also Ohtani's been like criminally underpriced as a hitter for almost the entire season on DraftKings, then appropriately priced on Fanduel. But when you can't include him as a hitter in your stacks, and he's one of the best hitters on the team, like if they have a big game on offense, there's a pretty good chance that Ohtani's going to be involved. So it really sucks for the team as a stock that there's not some way that's been figured out yet to where you could roster him as a pitcher and a hitter on the same slate. So it's already a really tough matchup against Glasnow. He's only allowed more than 1 earned run at a start once this entire season anyway. So he's not somebody I like to stack against. And then when you just consider that we're not able to use Ohtani in those stacks, it is easy enough for me to just avoid the Angels.
All right, let's keep going. Next game here, we got Toronto, 4 implied runs against Frankie Montas. Montas about appropriately owned as a pitcher on the slate. The Toronto stack also a little bit under-owned as a stack. And if you had to choose a side here, Montas or Toronto stacks, Greg, which one would you want to choose?
I would go with the Toronto side. Toronto actually has, I think, the best leverage score on our top stacks tool today. Yeah, they do. So they're fairly expensive, but still, we're looking at a team 1.5% ownership share with a 5% chance of being the top stack on the slate. So as far as high-end teams go, this looks like a really good pay-up to be contrarian spot for the Toronto Blue Jays because they're picking up almost no ownership, and Montas has been fairly inconsistent over the last couple of years.
Yeah, Montas is sort of dropping off, and I think, this is something you could point to. He did have that PED suspension. His home run rate has come up quite a bit to a 4.6% home run rate. The strikeout rate has fallen from 25% to 24% since 2019 to 2020. The xFIP also up to 4.4. So I'm not crazy onto Montas on a slate where he's going to be appropriately owned, and I do think the hitters are going to start to take advantage of him a little bit more. On the other side, we have Steven Matz going against Oakland, 4.5 implied runs for Oakland, and Matz has been he's had better strikeout stuff this year, but he's getting maybe unlucky with home runs, but a 7% home run rate over the last season and change. Matz, to me, not a guy I ever have any confidence in. He does seem slightly underowned in the top pitchers tool, but do you find Matz to be a worthwhile play? Again, I'd rather go to those guys we just talked about, Ohtani and Maeda.
No, I'm not a Steven Matz fan. I guess I'm a little biased here because I've stacked against him a ton with success since he's gotten called up to the big leagues a few years ago. But even so, like Steven Matz this year, he does have, respectable 4.0 ERA and the underlying numbers are good, but he's been so poor for the last couple of years. Last year, he had a 9.68 ERA, a 7.08 expected ERA. The year before, 4.21 ERA, 4.83 expected ERA. So this year, only 27 innings he's pitched so far with a 4 ERA. So, that's fine, but overall, he's not a guy I want to target at all as a pitcher and somebody who I expect to drop off in a pretty big way.
So you like going against Matz often. So are you going to Oakland today because they are another team that does seem underowned the top stacks tool and have a ton of power for the most part, especially a 1 through 5. I think after that, you could sort of maybe get your Jed Lowry's in, but at that price tag, I'm not sure I would. But top 5 to me for Oakland, I think, Greg, looks pretty appealing going against Matz.
Yeah, so I think as a contrarian stack, their team I want to be a little bit overweight to the field on, but a really low priority for me. It's the thing where I might get a couple percentage points overweight to the field, but I have much more interest in the Blue Jays side of the game, who have less ownership and a better chance of being a top stack overall in our top stacks tool today.
All right, next game up, we got Pittsburgh getting 3.6 implied runs against Miguel Diaz. Miguel Diaz, I don't believe pitched over the last season, but did pitch in 2019, faced 29 batters at a 14% carry at a 5.9 xFIP, but as a decent projection from Awesemo today, a 13 fantasy point projection, which at 4K on his DK salary maybe puts him in play as a DK SP2. And I think, Pittsburgh's bad enough to make the case of playing some Diaz, but Greg, how are you feeling about Diaz here? Where shockingly high, 39% chance of him being the top value pitcher on the slate with only 5% ownership expected on DraftKings.
Yeah, it's hard to know here because, like you said, we don't date on him since 2019. Even in 2019, he pitched 6 innings and struck out. It was 5.68 hitters per 9 innings, and he was a reliever then. So I don't think I don't expect to see Diaz pitch any more than, 2 innings or something like that today, right? I have to look up more information and see what kind of pitch count we're expecting on Diaz. But my expectation right now is just that he's going to be an opener.
Yeah, I think maybe it's weird because we used to have the openers a lot and they're pitching 1 or 2 innings. And I feel like now we've been getting more guys who are pitching 3 or 4 with a chance to get to 5. And I think maybe that's what Diaz is. Obviously, we should know more by the time the deeper dive rolls around in a couple hours. But the projection right now looks pretty solid. So based on how we're seeing it in the morning, I don't mind taking some stabs there for the same reasons that we made for Daniel Lynch. Just a cheap guy, maybe catches some guys by surprise. And the top pitchers tool does seem to be backing him out a good amount here just because of how bad Pittsburgh is. The Pittsburgh stack, though, Greg, looks a little bit underowned as well. So this is one spot to me. I think there should be some volatility, and getting both sides doesn't seem like the craziest move.
By the way, so Miguel Diaz has been pitching 3 to 4 inning stints in the Padres alternative site. So I think he probably gets through the lineup once, maybe twice, and comes out of the game. So I don't think he's going to work deep into the game. I prefer Lynch as a cheap pitching option, but I think we need a little bit more info on what his pitch count's expected to look like. But I would be really surprised if Diaz works deep into this game.
Pittsburgh hitters for you, do they seem appealing to you? I think to me, this is a mutual volatility spot where getting a little bit of both sides of the equation doesn't seem like a bad move.
They are going really underowned in our top stack store right now. We do have them with less than 1% ownership with 4% chance to be in the optimal lineup, but it's still a thing where I want more information on Diaz and just kind of see what's going to be going on here. But certainly if the Pirates are going to continue to be a team that picks up less than 1% ownership, then yeah, that would make them appealing.
And the bullpen behind Diaz not that bad either. One of the better bullpens of the 3.9 xFIP for San Diego. So keep that in mind too. I think in some respects you might want to see Diaz pitching a little bit more just to give the Pirates a better shot. The Padres getting 4.9 implied runs against Tyler Anderson. Tyler Anderson to me looks like mostly a non-factor at pitcher. You can get a little bit here. It's one of those slates where we're getting a little bit of most of these guys. Not crazy. Does seem under-owned according to the top pitchers tool, but not by a wide enough margin that he become a priority. Anderson himself is an 18% K rate. The Padres side, I think for the hitters would look more appealing, but they seem mostly appropriately owned on the top stacks tool. So the Padres hitters would be my preference. If you get some Tyler Anderson in tournaments, that's fine. But Greg, how are you feeling here? Do you have any strong opposition to either the Padres or Tyler Anderson?
No, I think everything you said right there was right. Tyler Anderson, not a high strikeout guy. Also a guy who maybe going forward, his numbers in the past aren't really fair to him since he made so many of his starts in his career at Coors Field. So that's certainly going to inflate his numbers. But still, the Padres, like you said, exactly appropriately owned on DraftKings with them 5.9% chance of being the top stack on the slate and 5.9% projected ownership. So that seems about fair to me. There's definitely teams that I want to pay up for that are higher priorities for me, like the Los Angeles Dodgers, the Cleveland Indians, the Toronto Blue Jays, who are picking up, like we said, almost no ownership. So Padres, not a team that I really feel like are going over or under owned. I think they're about a neutral play.
In the last game on the slate, Baltimore getting 4 implied runs against an unknown Mariners pitcher. Seattle getting 4.6 implied runs against Dean Kramer. Hard to talk about Baltimore very much against the Mariners, not knowing what that outcome is, though they do currently look a little bit under-owned on the top stacks tool. Obviously, that can move around based upon who's pitching. But Greg, any quick thoughts on Baltimore's hitters here, given that we don't know who they'll be facing?
No, it'll help once I know who the pitcher is and how easy or hard the matchup is.
Tends to be a core part of the equation, though. Apparently, Vegas can still put out a total for this game, so more power to him. Seattle, 4.6 implied runs against Dean Kramer. Kramer's strikeout stuff has not been terrible, and he's given up actually less home runs than league average, which surprises me given the fact that he is pitching in Baltimore for some of his starts. But Seattle stack, I think, they do look over-owned according to the top stack, so I would say they don't look terrible. But Kramer might be a better pitcher than people realize. He's going to be owned actually fairly well today. Another value guy you can throw in the mix, and I feel like the Kramer side to me is going to appeal more than the Seattle hitters, but I think a case could be made for both sides. Which way would you want to go, or which do you have a lean between Kramer or the Mariners hitters, Greg?
Yeah, I want to see what the ownership looks like later in the day, because if Kramer is going to hold 25% ownership, I can't be interested in him. There's certainly strikeout upside, a guy who we've only seen him make 8 big league starts. He's striking on 10.69 hitters per 9 innings in those starts, but he also has a 6.42 ERA, and then this year individually 6.06 expected ERA. So overall, Kramer at least looks like a guy who's going to be somebody who gives up a lot of runs, but also strikes out a bunch of guys along the way, which in general is not always the worst thing to target from a starting pitcher when you're going really cheap on DraftKings. It adds a little bit of volatility, and then you know that, like, hey, if he has a start where he's able to limit some runs, he's probably going to strike guys out, except the ownership's so high on him that's the reason I actually want to get to the Mariners, is just because Kramer right now projected for 23.7% ownership, one of the most popular pitchers of the day.
You have very good projection on them too, so that ownership might not drop off. Keep it in mind as we go through the day. And again, come back for the deeper dive in 3 hours, because we'll be talking about all this stuff more and hopefully have some more insight, like who's pitching today for a couple of teams. That could be helpful. Greg, give people the final plugs here. 10 games, 1 hour. We did it. I'm so proud of us.
Yeah, just go follow me on at Ehrenberg Dfs and pay attention to the weather today. Well, 2 things to pay attention to: the weather and the starting pitchers, right? Because 2 things. We need to know which games are playing and then if the matchup's good or not.
It's 2 core pillars of what you need to know in MLB DFS. So come back for the deeper dive in 3 hours. I will be here with Alex and Terry talking about everything on this 10-game slate. Follow at Chris Spags, follow at Ehrenberg DFS, follow at Awesemo_com, and shout out to our producer Tyler, always helping us out here, keep things running the right way. We appreciate all you guys for watching. Hit the like button before you go. We'll see you guys again soon. Bye.